Welcome to the High Performance Hockey Podcast. Before we introduce today's speakers, reminder, please DM messages at our Twitter feed at the HPH_podcast. Our goal is to answer a question at the onset of each episode. Having said that, going to break the rules today. Instead of answering a question, I want to speak about a new book called Strength Training for Hockey by Human Kinetics. Editors are good friends of mine, Neeld and Brijesh Patel. Very, very exciting in terms of the hockey market and education within this space. This book will be released Monday, November 11th. Make sure you order. You're also able to pre-order as well. The guts of the book. Part 1, Principles of Sport-Specific Resistance Training. Chapter 1, Importance of Resistance Training by Adam Douglas. Chapter 2, Analysis of Sport and Sport Positions by myself. Chapter 3, Testing Protocols and Athlete Assessment by Devin McConnell. Chapter 4, Sport-Specific Program Design Guidelines by Vicky Bendis. Then we shift to Part 2 of the book, Exercise Technique. We have Total Body Exercise Technique by Cam Davidson, Lower Body Technique, Mike Potenza, Upper Body Technique, Tim Labossiere, Anatomical Core Exercise Technique, Maria Mountain, and then finally, Part 3 of the book is Program Design and Guidelines, and this is really cool. There are programs for the high school athlete by Mark Fitzgerald, the college athlete, Matt Shaw, and the professional athlete by Maddie Nickel. Really, really interesting and awesome resource for the hockey professional. I love how the NSCA, Kevin Brijesh, had this favorable prerequisite where we talk about what steers the ship in terms and measures of the principles of the game, and then we speak and the book goes on to talk about the technique and exercise technique and finally programming. That way we're not missing spots or there are gaps. So there's a full onset in terms and measures of prerequisites for the reader, the strength coach, and the performance professional alike. Fantastic resource. Today's guests are the editors of this new book, Brijesh Patel and Kevin Neeld. Brijesh is a speaker, consultant, and performance coach at Quinnipiac University. He currently serves as the Associate Athletic Director, Director of Athletic Performance. Brijesh oversees the strength and conditioning development for all 21 varsity sports at Quinnipiac. He works primarily with men's and women's basketball and ice hockey teams. Kevin is the head performance coach for the Boston Bruins, where he oversees all aspects of designing and implementing the team's performance training program. Prior to Boston, Kevin spent 2 years as assistant strength and conditioning coach for the San Jose Sharks after serving as the director of a private sport performance facility in New Jersey for 7 years. He also served as a strength and conditioning coach with the U.S. Women's Olympic ice hockey team for 5 years. Again, these are the editors of this new book. We speak about the book, who it's designed for, why it's important, and how this fills a gap in the ice hockey performance world. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, gentlemen. Second time for both of you guys here. Really excited to have you both back. Two gentlemen I value a great deal, both as personal friends and colleagues, and obviously what you guys have done in strength and conditioning and high performance, obviously specifically for the sport of hockey, but going to be great. So I want to start right with the get-go here. Big book coming out here, gentlemen, November 11th on Monday, and we want to talk all about it because you both were editors in this book, Strength Training for Hockey. So Kev, I'm going to start with you, and B, you'll bat clean up here. What was the impetus for taking on this project, guys?
Well, I think B and I had a pretty similar experience that both of us on the same day just got an email from the NSCA and Human Kinetics just asking if we would have an interest in doing it. The email to me had mentioned that they had also emailed Brijesh and, that they were looking for two individuals to essentially co-edit the book. And I think my initial reaction was that I was just honored, flattered to be considered and to receive that email. And, I obviously after that, the opportunity to collaborate with Brijesh, who, has been a friend and mentor for the better part of 15 years now, I think at this point was a cool opportunity. So, it took me about 5 seconds to process everything before I hit reply, and told him I was on board.
B, real quick, how long have you guys known each other? Back in the day, you and Kev, was this like the Functional Strength Coach 1 DVD collection, like a la circa early 90s? Like, how long have you guys known each other?
And I remember when Chris Boyko, a longtime friend of mine from our Holy Cross days, brought a young Kevin Neeld to the Holy Cross weight room at Holy Cross. The year I don't remember. I started in Holy Cross in 2004, and I think it was probably 2005 or 2006. Functional Strength Coach 1 was 2005. It might have been 2006.
A little later, I think it was 2007.
Oh, was it? Okay, so 2007. So it was I remember Kev was at UMass Amherst doing his master's, and I think he was helping out Boyko and the hockey team. You know, at that time, before there were Zooms and a lot of podcasts, like people would do site visits. You know, I don't know if that's quite as common as it is these days. I try to encourage my staff and interns to do that all the time. But so Chris brought Kevin along with him on a little site visit, and man, he started peppering us with questions right off the bat. And so that was my first impression of Kev. He was really well read, really passionate. And then I think after that, did you do an internship with Cressy before or after that, Kev?
It was after that. That was the only reason I knew it was 2007, because that was my first year of grad school at UMass, and it was the summer in between my 2 years in 2008 that I was with Eric. But kind of just reflecting back on that whole process, like I reached out to Boyks about interning because he worked with the hockey team at UMass Amherst. He was the one that, obviously connected us out of the gate and gave me the opportunity to come meet you and Ollie at Holy Cross. And then he also was the one that introduced me to Eric at an NSCA. I think it was a regional, the Northeast Regional in Rhode Island that Eric spoke at, that we connected afterwards, and that's what opened the door for the internship at Cressy's spot. So, this, we're obviously going off on a tangent right out of the gate, which is classic. This is my forte here, but I think there's I think we all get questions from people, and like, how do we get into the field? How do we become better candidates for, B, jobs like the one you have, opportunities to work in professional sports, or, even to catch the eye of somebody like you, Ant, to come work in your facility. And, I can trace back, like, every opportunity that I've had, I can trace back to volunteering my time and reaching out to somebody and introductions that they made. And, Chris Boyko, I think he came to a Bruins game last year, so we were able to spend some time catching up a little bit, but it's a name that not a lot of people know. He doesn't have a strong online presence, but he's done as much to help my career as just about anybody else. He's introduced me to UB, and all these years later, we're working together on the project that we're talking about today. Obviously the introduction with Eric and the connection with Mike Boyle, and there's so many things I can trace back to that first experience. So I think there's a lesson in there somewhere for the young strength coaches to just find good people and get your foot in the door.
I think anybody listening to this is going to realize how much older than we are, Kev, now. I mean, shoot, I remember those days. Like, I have to echo Kevin exactly, is that I would never be in the position that I'm in currently without the people that came before me. And I was, we have a common friend amongst all of us in Mike Boyle, and I texted him last week, and at least once or twice a year, he's one I always reach out to say, and I just appreciate you, appreciate everything that you did for me, because I would never be in the situation I am right now without him. And I just have so many countless other people to be able to thank along the way. From Sean Windle, who kind of took me first underneath his wing. He introduced me to Jeff Oliver. Jeff Oliver ended up hiring me. Jeff Oliver ended up telling me, and Sean Windle told Mike Boyle about me, so I ended up getting that internship. And then I went back to UConn. I was fortunate to be able to go to grad school with Eric Cressy, so I became friends with Eric Cressy. And then through the people I met through Holy Cross, Boyko being one of them, Kevin has become a friend of mine. We've sent tons of other interns through Eric Cressy, through Boyle, and that same kind of Northeast circle that we're really fortunate to be a part of. But if anybody that's listening to this, any young coach, and this is something that's become a lost art, in my opinion, is volunteering and getting reps. And nothing Nothing can replace repetitions of being in a weight room. You can learn, you can read everything, you can listen to every podcast, but the amount of repetitions that you can develop in interacting with another human being and learning and developing your coaching eye, you're never going to get that in any kind of academic course. And I think what's become a lost art in this day and age with the online kind of presence is everybody feels like they can kind of make it big and they can kind of make it quick. But the quality of coaches that they're being produced, I don't think it's as nearly as close as it was in the late 90s, early 2000s, early 2010s, before, you know, the Instagram coaches started coming out. So that's just like a little, it's not much of a rant, but it's a little bit of a soapbox. But I'm dating myself, but it's anybody young that's listening to this. If you want to try to make it to where Kev's at, you want to make it to where Ant's at, you want to make it to where I'm at, like you got to put in reps, and it's going to be painstakingly difficult at times. And there's nothing that can replace that. No matter how many books you read, no matter how many courses you've taken, if you don't put reps and work your ass off on a day in, day out basis, nobody ever is going to put their name on the line for you guys. And I know in the positions that we're in and experiences we had, people put their names on the line for us to be able to prove to them that we earn that. I get texts and I get emails about possible positions. I got one from a friend yesterday. I'm like, I don't have anybody for you. Because I can't put my name on the line for somebody because the quality of coaches is just it's not as high as it used to be.
It's funny you say that because it's funny. Obviously back in the Endeavor days, we had interns that were coming through year round. So, I was exposed personally to more people that were kind of at that stage of their coaching career that when jobs opened up and people asked me for recommendations, there were a handful of names that came to mind immediately that had demonstrated, the work ethic and the value and the coaching ability and the personality to be successful in some of those roles. And it's been funny the last few years. Like I've reached out, there's been other teams that have reached out to me for candidates. We've had some changes internally that we've needed to fill spots. And, I've reached out to my network to ask for candidates. And a lot of the responses have been like, sorry, I don't have anybody for you. Or, there was one guy, but he just interviewed for this job or whatever the case is. And, that does seem, I've wondered over the last, 9 years or so, if it's just been because my position has changed and I'm not working in, an environment where we're running an internship program. But it seems to be an issue really across North America.
I can tell you from our experience in the private sector, I would echo every single thing that you guys have talked about in terms of this apprenticeship model, getting reps, coaching versus the theory in the textbook. It's great to have that knowledge, but you've got to put it together in working parts. I read a tweet probably a week and a half ago, and I'm going to bastardize it, and I'm paraphrasing it, but it's from a coach who's been in it for a long time. He said, if you're a young coach and you want to really step ahead of the game, he said either volunteer or get a non-paid internship for 6 months coaching 13 to 16-year-olds. After that time, you're going to know if you want to coach or how good of a coach you are, because you got to put that time in. And that's 6 months. I mean, our internships are anywhere from 3 months to a long 4 to 5 months. But, and I say this really respectfully, we've had some great ones, but I do notice a change, specifically what you said about the 90s and 2000s and where we're at now. My theory on that is there's everyone wants to steal home plate without crossing the bases first. And I think social media has, it's a beauty and it's also a beast in so many ways in our field. So that's my narrative, but it's refreshing hearing from different perspectives because I do see it in the private sector as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it an epidemic, but it's something that I know there's a lot of people that like use. There's a great analogy of crossing home plate without going around the bases. A lot of people that I recognize now, they want to skip steps, and there's no skipping steps if you desire greatness. If you want to achieve a position with some level of recognition, or if you want to work with, in our situation, hockey, which tends to be a premier sport at the collegiate level, or obviously at the professional level, like there's a lot of repetitions that you need to be able to put in to develop yourself as a coach first and foremost before you can work with one or two sports.
Strength training for hockey. B, you're up on this one. I'd be curious your thoughts, and then Kev, I would like you to clean up here. The strength training for hockey, the book, and maybe more of a broader based question. What's the difference between strength training for hockey versus any other land based sports? From your experience, and I know it all depends, and there's context here based on athlete age. Happy to add context to your question if you need it.
Yeah, I'd like to say first of all, like I felt honored when I first got the email too for Kev about trying to put this book out, and myself, I've read all the other kind of specific books that the NSCA and Human Kinetics has put out, and to be able to work on a project with Kevin and specifically for the sport of ice hockey, I think was awesome. Now to come back to what's the actual differences when it comes to strength training, a lot of it depends on truly understanding the sport. And I think the first couple chapters in the book really lay the foundation for a comprehensive analysis of the sport, positional demands, energy system demands, the nuances of understanding skating, the nuances on understanding seasons and the demands that are going to be placed upon the body. And then using that information, it kind of goes into the book will go into different exercises that you can use. Now, when it comes to exercises, like I train basketball too. Like the exercise that we do for basketball and hockey aren't going to be completely different. They might be different at times of the year. They might be different protocols that we might implement in terms of sets and reps and goals and adaptations that we're looking to create. But the exercises in and of itself are all really every athlete specific rather than just hockey specific. Now, there are some nuances and some differences with some variations to try to maybe bulletproof certain parts of the body that often have injuries, whether it be the adductors, hips, knees, ankles, backs, shoulders, which might be a little bit different than other sports. But those are little nuances and minor differences when it comes to sport and sport. And then unfortunately, in terms of the programming that's being laid out in the book too, that's specific for hockey. But in reality, you can make a lot of those generalizations to other sports as well too. So it's athlete specific, but in terms of the context of this specific book, it's truly understanding the sport in and of itself from a inside outside perspective, and then understanding how the exercise in the program kind of fits into that.
Kevin, anything to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think B did a great job kind of summarizing the some of the considerations for what makes something a quote unquote hockey specific or not. I think hockey is somewhat unique in the emphasis on the lateral pushing patterns. There's a little bit more of a horizontal force emphasis than there is vertical. There's certainly a single leg component. Some of the common injury patterns to the adductor complex and hip flexors, those are a little unique to hockey. There's other sports, obviously soccer being one that comes to mind that those are issues for as well. I think the push dominant pattern starting from positions of deep hip and knee bends, those are things that, are prolific in hockey that, maybe are just part of the puzzle in other sports. So, as far as, exercises being hockey specific or not, I do think that it starts with understanding what you're hoping to accomplish and, what you're hoping the outcome of the exercise or the intervention to be, and then picking exercises to fit that goal. And, there's a lot of great examples of different strategies and approaches you can take in the program design chapters of this book. We had, three incredible contributors to those sections specifically in Matt Shaw and Matt Nickel, and then Fitzy too, Mark Fitzgerald. So, guys that obviously have a just tremendous amount of experience working with athletes across all ages. So, I think that's a big feature of the book.
Speaking of those contributors, Adam Douglas, you've got Devin McConnell, Vicky Bendis, Cam Davidson, Mike Potenza, Tim, and I hope, is it Labossiere? Am I right?
It's Labossiere. He's not, it's not as French as
he's going to smack me once. Sorry. Maria Mountain, Fitzy. You got Matt Shaw and Matt Nickel. Kev, I'd like you to answer this one. Chapter contributors. This is a big boy and big girl list here. How did you choose?
You forgot yourself.
Yeah. Okay, Anthony Donskov. How did you choose, Kev? How did you choose these contributors? You and B. Kev, you start.
Yeah, I think the NSCA and human kinetics kind of provided a framework for, the number of chapters, what each chapter would cover, and then kind of left it up to us on brainstorming a list of potential contributors, and then obviously, it has to fit for the contributors' schedule and make sure that they have the time and energy and the ability to contribute as well. And I think when B and I first approached this, we just put together a, kind of a wish list. Like, who I think a lot of the names on this are people that I personally have learned a lot from and continue to learn a lot from. They're, mentors and colleagues of mine that I know have produced a lot of really good content, that are highly educated, but kind of circling back to the tangential rant that we had earlier on things that have changed in the in our industry over the last, whatever it's been, 15, 20 years. I think all of these people have real in the trenches experience across, across a wide range of settings and working with different populations. So we were fortunate that everybody that we reached out to was able to contribute. And that was kind of how we started, was just putting together the wish list of the dream team, and then just kind of touching base and seeing if everybody could do it.
Yeah, it was a fun experiment, I think, for Kevin and I, where we got to select, the people that we respect a lot, and the people that we understand have contributed in their own right to the sport of ice hockey in training, particularly. And again, like Kevin said, like they put the reps in, they've got the practical experience um along with the education to try to fit both sides of the coin, per se. Um, and it was like an all-star lineup that we were able to put together. And when we started reaching out, and I think fortunately for us, like, we already had some well-developed relationships, personal as well as professional, where everybody was very excited about trying to um, be involved in the project.
Let me ask you a piggyback question here. B, you can start here. Number one, who's the book for? And then, you look at several of the catalog books Human Kinetics have, outstanding books, specifically in hockey. How is this book potentially different? Or, what themes overlap?
The book specifically is for any kind of hockey athlete, a hockey coach who may not have the ability to have a strength conditioning coach alongside them. So think like a high school team or a junior team or a midget team that wants to start understanding conceptual frameworks of how to incorporate strength training into what they do from a technical tactical standpoint. And it's also for strength coaches. It's also for strength coaches that specifically work with hockey, and maybe it might be the new a young strength coach who's never worked with the sport before, so they can start to develop a framework and understanding of what the sport is and what are the demands of the sport, and what things should I consider when it comes to designing a strength training program for them specifically. By no means is it a comprehensive program. Like, it doesn't, we never went into speed, we never went to power, we didn't go into energy systems at all. It is specifically designed for strength training for hockey players.
Yeah, I would just add that I from my perspective, when I was in college and I first started to purchase books on my own to read in this area, there really weren't a lot of great options within the hockey space. I found Peter Twist's hockey conditioning, I think, or conditioning for hockey book. And then, there was a like late 80s physiology for ice hockey book that I had to buy from the authors directly.
I got it behind me, Kevin.
Yeah. So there weren't really there weren't a lot of great options on resources specific to hockey. And, B was right that from a programming standpoint, this book focuses on strength training for ice hockey. But the first four chapters, the first section of the book, really summarizes all of the factors that need to be considered when designing a hockey training program. And to me, having spent a lot of time reading and rereading those four chapters, I think that those chapters by themselves are an incredible resource, and one that I wish that I had access to when I was in
Excellent.
college and starting my career as a coach. So, I think even if somebody is interested in working with hockey players, or, hockey players themselves looking for a better understanding of what a quality program should look like and some of the considerations that go into designing programs, I think that it's a great resource for them.
This episode has been brought to you by the High Performance Hockey Masterclass. The High Performance Hockey Masterclass is a comprehensive lecture series exploring the science and practice of high performers in the sport of ice hockey. It was designed and created and engineered by myself, Anthony Donskov. It is an 8-part lecture series that includes metric fixation, the tyranny of metrics, reading research, what matters, going back to get my PhD as a 40-year-old, how do you target your readings in terms of digesting, accumulating, and reading your research, biomechanical considerations for ice hockey, the adductor magnus, how we program hip health during the off-season and in-season, the Gain Go Grow model, this idea of a 3-day rollover program for high-performance hockey players, considerations for the in-season, how to manipulate that model for high performers, our communication structure within the confines of Donskov strength and conditioning, and finally, the fast and frugal tree, considerations for return to play. More information on the High Performance Hockey Masterclass can be found at anthonygumroad.com. Thanks for listening. I have to piggyback on that, Kev. It is an outstanding. I know we talked off air here, and we talked about the NSCA's guidelines and how they had this favorable prerequisite in terms of chapters. I'm just going to go over this. Chapter 1, the importance of resistance training. Chapter 2, analysis of sport and sport positions. Chapter 3, testing protocols and athlete assessment. And Chapter 4, sport-specific program design and guidelines. I mean, you talk about setting the dinner table for the ensuing chapters. It makes just great sense. And then obviously part 2 of this book, exercise technique, total body exercise technique, lower body technique, upper body technique, anatomical core exercise technique. And then part 3 is all of the programming. And this is masterful in terms of the programming being Fitzy's chapter on the high school athlete or the high school hockey player, Shawzy's article on the college player, and Matty Nichols on professional hockey. It's a fantastic logical progression. And I will piggyback what you said, Kev. When I was in my infancy years as a young strength and conditioning coach, you might get the former without the latter without the former. In this book, you really get it all. And I think it really makes sense for the reader. And it's a really, really important resource just with that information alone.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that the goal with the first 4 chapters was really to provide an overview of everything that goes into designing programs for hockey players, not just the how, but the why. And then the rest of the book really zooms in on strength training specifically. But, there's so much information there that, I almost feel like if we did a follow-up book and it was speed training for hockey, that those first 4 chapters wouldn't need to change a whole lot. Chapter 1, the importance of strength training would be the importance of speed training, but the chapters that you wrote, that Vicky wrote, that Devin wrote on, analyzing the sport, the different positions, testing protocols and profiling the athletes, and then program design considerations that are specific to hockey. I think those would be pretty similar across a book that was written on speed training or power training or, even conditioning. I think it really sets the stage for all the areas that are important to consider when designing programs for hockey players.
Excellent. Perhaps this question's been asked just differently. I want to, relating to the book, of course, I love this logical progression. Do we, right now, looking back in the rear view with the young, do we feel like this approach, we're missing a lot of steps with younger coaches now, meaning those first four chapters, we don't have a really good understanding of, regardless of sport, doesn't matter, basketball, football, and we jump into programming as young coaches. Do you feel that way? B, starting with you?
Yeah, I think because I see a lot of young coaches, like we run we're fortunate we have interns year round. And what I see that they often lack in their development is just the foundational physiology, foundational principles of exercise physiology, of biomechanics, of anatomy. Like they've taken all the courses, but they don't understand how to apply it per se when it comes to coaching and exercise and training. And I think the first 4 chapters are outstanding. I remember when we set to review them, and Kevin and I, we kind of split the book up in terms of responsibilities, and we kind of reviewed each other's. I remember remarking to him, I said, these are ups. These chapters, the authors did a phenomenal job. They are foundational to any young coach's development and truly understanding how to work with a specific sport, regardless of the sport that you decide to use. But you have to understand, what are the principles of strength training? What are the principles of overload? Like all these types of things that we don't take for granted, but we understand them. I think young coaches need to truly understand that, but also understand biomechanics, understand physiology. What is it that I'm looking to try to create when I design a program? What adaptations am I looking for? Why? How am I going to test it? How do I know if it works? Like, these are the foundational principles that every young coach needs to develop. And I know that we're talking about hockey right now, and I'm sure you probably have some other strength coaches that listen to your podcast, and maybe some coaches from other fields. I think the book would benefit everybody, because it gets them to understand a different way to think, outside the box, maybe just a little bit. So instead of, if somebody, trains football specifically, or just baseball players, being able to read a book on hockey strength training, the first 4 chapters, you're going to get so much understanding of maybe how to look at your sport that you specifically train just a little bit differently. And then you can really create a really good foundational awareness of what it is that you want to train and how you're going to develop those qualities, and, test for the things that you're looking for.
Kevin, any additional comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think my own personal evolution, and when I first, got into the field, I was thinking like, all right, how do I design the best hockey program possible? And then, you start to notice like, all right, you watch the goalies and they're doing things that are a little different than the forwards and the defensemen, and defensemen play more, and the shift structure is a little different. And I actually had an experience in college where I played defense my first 2 years and then played forward my last 2 years. And in the transition period, had opportunities to switch from one to the other. And they don't feel the same to play from a conditioning standpoint. So, it's how do I design the best hockey program? And then, all right, there's some position considerations. And then, I want to say that my first group of like junior college and professional players that I trained after grad school, like 7 of the 9 guys had some significant injury in their rearview mirror that affected the way that they move. So, then it kind of evolves into like, all right, now how do we kind of work around some of these physical limitations that somebody has? And then ultimately, you get 2 guys, even if they're the same position at the same level, same team, same injury history, their underlying physiological makeup may be different. And because of that, their goals and what they need from a training standpoint might be different. So, you kind of go through that progression of, what looks like specificity up front from a hockey standpoint really isn't from an individual athlete standpoint. And I think that's one of the cool things about the way that the early part of this book is structured, is that it really gives you an appreciation for all those different layers of, not just what are the different things that should be considered when you're designing a program for an athlete, but also with Devin's chapter, it's what are your feedback loops to see, are there areas that really need to be brought up to speed more than others? And how do you know you're actually making progress in some meaningful way? And, I think that, as B mentioned, those are principles that really apply to all sports, but specific to hockey, I think you guys did an outstanding job of really laying that out for the reader in this book.
November 11th, 2024 is a Monday. That is the official release date for the book, Strength Training for Hockey. Let me ask you, Kev, I'm going to, this one, I'd like you to answer first, and then B, please piggyback. You mentioned the Twist book. You mentioned, I'll mention Bompa. These are old resources when we first started getting into the game. I probably had hair at that time, okay? Actually, I probably didn't.
Me too.
My question is, Kev, what are several changes that you've encountered in sport performance? Let's talk about it in hockey. The book release being Monday, comparatively speaking to obviously an old school, 90s, 2000s. What would be some differences? Obviously, That we've got a lot more technology. We got more objective numbers. We have a deeper understanding, a little bit more of biomechanics. I don't want to bias your answer, but what are some changes that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think the technology side of things is a big one. We have more ways to provide feedback to the athlete live while they're training on, the speed of movement, or things that can drive intent during the training process. That obviously then gives you an opportunity to collect some information to track progress over time. But I think more broadly speaking, and from a training standpoint, like my introduction to training for hockey was some just awkward combination of bodybuilding, maybe thrown in with a little bit of powerlifting with endurance training. And I think that it's changed a lot now in all sports, where I think that there's more intelligent ways to design training programs from a purely a strength standpoint. So what are from an exercise selection standpoint, what are single leg training has received a lot of attention over the last 10 years. That certainly, or 15, 20 years even, but that certainly wasn't the case when when we were reading through some of those earlier resources. I think from a conditioning standpoint, this whole idea of repeat sprint ability, and looking at sports not just from how long is a shift and how long are they on the bench, but what are the players actually doing when they're on the ice, and what are the characteristics of their movement demands within a shift, because it's not 45 seconds of constant movement at a moderate intensity pace. It's several bouts of shorter but maximum efforts interspersed with some periods of repositioning or battling for a puck in the corner, or whatever the case is. And the way that you would go about developing those qualities is very different. So I think there's a lot more information on the most appropriate ways to condition for hockey. I think the evolution of training and understanding that not every player needs to put on muscle mass too, that there are principles and ways to take advantage of neural adaptations, where you can improve strength, you can improve rate of force development, you can improve power output and speed without making significant changes in body comp. I think is an important evolution. And then even just the focus on speed and power, and the training strategies to develop those, namely that there's a point in every athlete's training process where they have likely developed enough strength where the amount of effort and resources that it would take to get 1% stronger may be better allocated into getting 5% faster or more powerful. And that conversation of not just continuing to get stronger and stronger and stronger for the sake of pushing and chasing weight room numbers, but really looking at what effect is this going to have for the player on the ice, and is it worth the time and energy and resource allocation to chase that, or is that energy better spent in other places, including potentially not in the weight room, doing additional on ice skill development work or skating work or whatever the case is. So, I think it's at least in my experience, the way that I was looking at things and the information that I was exposed to early on, things have changed a lot over the last 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have much to add to what Kev said, because I think he was really comprehensive with that answer. I think early on, in my own personal development, and some of the resources that were out at that time, almost took a like a grenade approach to training, right? Like, we learn things from powerlifting, learn things from bodybuilding, and learn things from powerlifting, and then we sprinkled in some things from track and field, and some conditioning that we thought was appropriate. And over the years, I think that what's happened in terms of the evolution is that younger athletes have started to develop training at a younger age, with the advent of private facilities and a little bit more sport specificity starting earlier in their career. A lot of kids have started to develop training as part of their regimen early on. And then as that's happened, And as resources have improved in terms of just not only just education and knowledge and trying things out, but also technology, we've been able to create almost like a sniper approach to training, where we could target in, like Kev said, if we need to focus in a little bit more on relative strength development versus absolute strength development, or if we need to focus on power development or speed development, we've started to implement and learn different techniques where we can try to individualize the programming to each individual athlete based on their own biomechanics, based on their needs. And those needs are developed through testing and being able to utilize technology as best as we can. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things that's developed over the course of the years is being able to take a really targeted approach. Now, not everybody is going to need that. And then there's probably some athletes, especially younger developing athletes, are going to get better at anything that they do. But being able to take some things away from the book that we developed might help them probably lay a little bit better foundation for training that they're going to be able to do in the future.
Excellent. Kev, I'll send this one to you first. You know, if you're writing this book in 20 years, Kev, what are the changes? What's the future of high performance hockey? I'll give you my narrative, and I look at again those first four chapters. I don't think they change much, right? Perhaps the technology and the testing parameters, perhaps. Where I see the big difference being probably measurement and technology, and maybe not so much measuring the hard skills, but trying to find areas to measure the soft skills, hockey IQ, timing, spacing. If you're to write this book and you're trying to see into the future, which you can't, I'm asking, what do you see the future of high performance in hockey being?
Yeah, it's a great question and a challenging one to answer. Obviously, I think the direction that things have really evolved in the last 2 decades is towards a more comprehensive intake and using the information you have available to drive more individualized programming. And I think B mentioned a really important point to hit, and I talk about individualization a lot. Like younger kids are going to adapt favorably to almost anything. And if there's some value in this book, it's that just because they can get better doing anything doesn't mean that there aren't negative long-term consequences from some strategies that they may use. So, using a more intelligent training approach at younger ages is likely to minimize some wear and tear that may protect their durability and longevity in the long run, a decade down the road. But, looking into the future, I think individualization is a big part of that. I think, the ability to quantify what an athlete is actually doing through the training process and how they're responding to it is going to improve substantially. Obviously AI is a topic that's top of mind right now. And, I think for most people, they're not really sure where that fits in their current lifestyle, understandably so. But, I think we're starting to see some examples of maybe there's a world where the garments that you're wearing are collecting information on what you're doing, whether that's changes in body temperature, whether it's muscle activity, heart rate, perspiration, any of those things. And then, there's other wearable technology that's providing information on HRV at night and respiratory rate and resting heart rate and some other things that will allow you to have a much more finely tuned, input and output understanding that can guide your training volume and some of your training decisions moving forward. I think that's probably big picture that affects everybody. It's specific to hockey. It was probably during your playing career, and that there was a pretty big change to the rules in hockey that they started to introduce penalties that limited obstruction, obstruction hooking and obstruction holding and some other things that really sped the pace of play up in the game. And that's had a profound effect on the way the game's played now. Obviously you're seeing smaller, highly skilled, faster players succeed at the highest levels now that you did not see. Certainly when I was growing up, there were 1 to 3 of those guys in the NHL. Now there seems to be a couple on every team. I think it's conceivable in the next 20 years that there would continue to be some rule changes that may impact the archetype and the physical demands that are required of players. So I think the game has hit a point now that it's highly entertaining. The scoring's up, the pace of play's up, the skill is up. I think that all those things are important. And then you mentioned something that I think is still very much a gray area that, at our level, you have the NHL combine and you have conversations with kids, but there's a lot of players that succeed or not based on different reasons, but sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's their commitment to taking care of themselves in a way that's going to allow them to be consistent on the ice. It's work habits, it's things like that. But sometimes players just can't think the game at the speed that it's played at the NHL level, and maybe at the college level, which is still of what I would consider a elite high level of competition. They can, but the players are a little bit they're bigger, they're faster, you have less time, you have less space, and the ability to process all the inputs and to make an appropriate decision with the puck, or to anticipate where the play is moving, to find soft areas in the ice, those can really be difference makers for players. And you see players that, if you line them up on the goal line and just do a goal line to goal line speed test, or the all-star game fastest skater test, that would not be in the top 50% of the league, that have had really, really successful NHL careers. And it's because they see the game slow, and that allows them to find spaces and find opportunities that help compensate for their lack of actual skating speed. And you see other players that are the exact opposite. They can win the race to the wrong place consistently, and it doesn't it doesn't help the game at all. So I think having a better understanding of, what's an athlete's psychological makeup, top level, are they going to put the work in? Are they going to be a good teammate? Are they going to help contribute to a winning culture and winning organization? That's important. I think that that'll be part of future resources for athletes across all sports. And then, next layer down, specific to hockey, the decision making element, and how can we get a better understanding of an athlete's aptitude and how that is challenged as their time and space decreases, because that's the biggest thing that I think changes as players ascend from level to level.
I don't know if I got anything to add to that. That was pretty comprehensive. The only thing I can say is, like, looking ahead in the future, like I don't anticipate our physiology changing much at all. But like Kev said, I think the things that are going to be the difference is the rules of the game. What's the game going to look like? Are we going to continue to get higher skill levels? Is the game going to continue to get faster? And then how can we best prepare the athletes that we're fortunate enough to be able to work with for the demands that are going to be being placed upon them?
Strength training for hockey, November 11th, this coming Monday. Where can we find more information about the book, B?
As for now, it's on humankinetics.com. I think you can pre-order, right, Kev? I think you can pre-order, and you can probably get it beforehand. And then I think it'll be available on Amazon after that.
Our guests today have been Brijesh Patel and Kevin Neeld. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. Thank you for all you do in the performance landscape. Thanks for being great friends, and thanks for joining us on the podcast. Really excited for this book. Honored to be a small part of the contribution in terms of a chapter, and really looking forward to diving in and reading chapter for chapter, page for page. Gentlemen, thank you for your time.